Among the events that occurred during the reign of King Charles II of Great Britain, and which tends to connect unfavorable associations with it, was a very extraordinary affair which is known in history by the name of the Popish Plot. The plot was said to have been formed by the Catholics to put King Charles to death and place his brother James, who was a Catholic, upon the throne in his stead. The plot first came to light when one day in 1678, when the king was walking in the park with a party of companions and attendants who were apart more or less from him. A friend named Kirby came up to him and with a mysterious and earnest air, begged the king not to allow himself to be separated from the company, for his life, he said, was in danger. Charles was not easily frightened and he received this announcement with great composure. He asked an explanation and Kirby informed him that a plot had been formed by the Catholics to destroy him. Kirby said that there was a clergyman, a doctor with the awkward surname of Tongue, who was fully acquainted with all the particulars of the plot and that if the king would grant him an interview that evening, he would make them all known. The king agreed to this and in the evening Dr. Tongue was introduced. He had a case of papers which he presented to the king. The incredulous Charles, not having leisure or inclination to peruse them, sent them to the Lord Treasurer and ordered the two informers to lay the business before that minister. Tongue told the treasurer that the author of the intelligence had given him a more particular account of the conspiracy but desired that his name might be concealed, being apprehensive lest the papists should murder him. The king concluded that the whole was an imposture. The matter would probably have slept forever had it not been for the anxiety of the Catholic James, the current Duke of York and future king. Hearing that priests and Jesuits and even his own confessor had been accused, James was desirous that a thorough inquiry should be made by the council into the pretended conspiracy. Any suspicion of a Catholic plot formed to dethrone his brother necessarily implicated him. Charles was of one religious faith, and his brother James was of the other. The death of Charles would naturally lead to a religious revolution, and this kept the whole community in an exceedingly excitable and feverish state. In a short time, vague but exaggerated rumors on the subject began to circulate through the community at large, which awakened a very general anxiety and alarm. Everything relating to the subject was invested with a mysterious awe and the most wonderful stories were readily circulated and believed. Kirby and Tongue were inquired after, and were now found to be in close connection with Titus Oates, the person who was said to have conveyed the first intelligence to the others. Oates, whose only object was to obtain rewards for making known the plot which he had pretended to discover, now found to his great satisfaction that the fire which he had kindled was beginning to burn. At the request of James, a meeting of the Privy Council was called and Oates was summoned to attend it. Before the time arrived he went to a Justice of the Peace, Sir Edmund Godfrey, and laid the evidence before him of the existence of the conspiracy and of all the details respecting it which he pretended to have discovered. The plot as Oates invented and detailed it was on the most magnificent scale imaginable. The Pope himself was at the head of it. His Holiness had laid the subject before a society of learned theologians at Rome and they had decided that in such a case as that of England, where the sovereign and a majority of the people had renounced the true religion and given themselves up to avowed and open heresy, the monarch lost all title to his crown. The realms thus fallen from the faith lapsed to the Pope and were to be reclaimed by him, by any mode which it seemed to him expedient to adopt. Under these circumstances the Pope had assumed the sovereignty over England, and had commissioned the Society of the Jesuits, a very powerful religious society, to take possession of the realm. In the prosecution of this plan the king was to be assassinated and that a very large sum of money had been raised by the Pope and the Jesuits to be paid to any person who would kill the king. Besides the murder of Charles, a general assassination of the Protestants was to take place. There were 20,000 Catholics in London who were to rise on a prearranged night. Each one was to kill 5 Protestants, which it was thought they could easily do as the Protestants would be taken wholly by surprise and would be unarmed. The revolution being thus effected, the crown was to be offered to Charles's brother James as a gift from the Pope. If he should refuse to accept it on such conditions as the Pope might see fit to impose, he was himself to be immediately executed, and some other disposal to be made of the kingdom. Oates was himself of the most infamous kind. He was the son of an Anabaptist preacher, but had taken orders in the Church of England. He had been indicted for perjury and by some means had escaped from the crime, a conviction for which he would have lost both of his ears. He was afterwards a chaplain on board the fleet but had been dismissed on complaint of some practices not named. He then became a convert to the Catholics and lived for a time in a Jesuit seminary, but he afterwards boasted that his conversion was a mere pretense in order to gain access to their secrets and to betray them. This abandoned man, when examined before the council, betrayed his impostures in such a manner as would have utterly discredited the most consistent story, and the most reputable evidence. The public, however, knew little or thought little of these proofs. They hated the Catholics and were eager to believe and to circulate anything which tended to excite the public mind against them. Like people frightened and in the dark, they took every figure for a spectre. The terror of each person became the source of terror to another. A universal panic being spread, reason and argument, common sense and common humanity lost all influence. A circumstance now occurred which added tenfold to the excitement, and produced a general consternation. This was the sudden and mysterious death of Sir Edmund Godfrey, the justice who had taken the depositions of Oates in respect to the conspiracy. He had been missing for several days and at length his body was found in a trench by the side of a field in a solitary place not far from London. The coroner's jury was advised by two surgeons, who like the rest of the world, were biased by the belief that Sir Edmund had been slain by the bloody papists. In the reign of mad terror which followed, everyone was apt to accommodate his evidence to that belief. They who wished to believe Oates's story found in the justice's death most ample confirmation of it. The panic spread itself on every side with infinite rapidity. All men, astonished with fear and animated with rage, saw in Sir Edmund fate all the horrible designs ascribed to the Catholics, and no further doubt remained of Oates's veracity. The voice of the nation united against that hated sect, and notwithstanding that the bloody conspiracy was supposed to be now detected, men could scarcely be persuaded that their lives were yet in safety. Each hour teemed with new rumors and surmises. Invasions from abroad, insurrections at home, even private murders and poisonings, were predicted. To deny the reality of the plot was to be an accomplice. To hesitate was criminal. Royalist, Republican, Churchman, sectarian, courtier, patriot, all parties concurred in the illusion. The city prepared for its defense as if the enemy were at its gates. The chains and posts were put up, and it was a noted saying at that time of Sir Thomas Player, the Chamberlain, that were it not for these precautions, all the citizens might rise next morning with their throats cut. From this time the excitement and commotion went on increasing at a very rapid rate. Oates himself became immediately a man of great importance. To maintain himself in his new position, he invented continually new stories, each more terrible than the preceding. Besides these, assassinations and fires, insurrections, rebellions and massacres were projected by that religious order in all the three kingdoms. There were 20,000 Catholics in London who would rise, and they might easily cut the throats of 100,000 Protestants. 8,000 Catholics had agreed to take arms in Scotland. A general massacre of the Irish Protestants was concerted. New informers began to appear, confirming Oates's statements and adding new details of their own, that they might share his distinctions and rewards. These men became continually more and more bold in proportion to the increasing readiness of the people to receive their inventions for truths. They accused persons of higher and higher rank, until at last they dared to implicate the Queen herself in their charges. They knew that as she was a Catholic, she was unpopular with the nation at large, and as Charles had so many other lady favourites, they concluded that he would feel no interest in vindicating her from false aspersions. They accordingly brought forward accusations against the Queen of having joined in the conspiracy, of having been privy to the plan of murdering the King, and of having actually arranged and directed the assassination of the Justice, Sir Edmund. Although the popular sentiment was against her, every fair and candid mind that attended carefully to the evidence decided unhesitatingly in her favour. The stories of the witnesses were utterly inconsistent with each other, and in many of their details impossible. Still, so great was the public credulity, and so eager the desire to believe everything, however absurd, which would arouse and strengthen the anti-Catholic feeling, that the Queen found herself soon the object of extreme and universal odium. The king, it was well known, bore no great affection to his consort, and now, more than ever, when his brother and heir was so much hated, had reason to be desirous of issue which might quiet the jealous fears of his people. But Charles, notwithstanding all allurements of pleasure, or interest, or safety, had the generosity to protect his injured consort. "They think," said he, "I have a mind to a new wife, but for all that, I will not see an innocent woman abused." In this disposition of the nation, reason could no more be heard than a whisper in the midst of the most violent hurricane. Though the Catholics had seen suddenly and unexpectedly detected, at the very moment when their conspiracy, it is said, was ripe for execution, no arms, no ammunition, no money, no commissions, no papers, no letters, after the most rigorous search, ever were discovered, to confirm the evidence of Oates. Yet still the nation, though often frustrated, went on in the eager pursuit and confident belief of the conspiracy, and even the manifold inconsistencies and absurdities contained in the narratives, instead of discouraging them, served only as further incentives to discover the bottom of the plot. The trials of the pretended criminals were carried on, and the courts of judicature, places which ought to be kept more pure from injustice than even national assemblies, were strongly infected with the same party rage and bigoted prejudices. The king was alarmed when he saw so dreadful a tempest arise from such small and unaccountable beginnings. His life, if Oates' information were true, had been aimed at by the Catholics. Even the Duke's was in danger. The higher the rage mounted against popery, the more should the nation have been reconciled to these princes in whom, it appeared, the Church of Rome reposed no confidence. But men gave credit to the informers, while they still retained their old suspicions that the Papists were secretly favoured by the king and had obtained the most entire ascendant over his brother. Charles saw the danger to which the succession, and even his own crown and dignity, now stood exposed. A large party was formed against him. On the one hand it was composed of a populace so credulous from prejudice, so blinded with religious antipathy, as implicitly to believe the most palpable absurdities. It was conducted, on the other hand, by leaders so little scrupulous as to endeavour, by encouraging perjury, subornation, lies, impostures, and even by shedding innocent blood, to gratify their own furious ambition, and subvert all legal authority. Roused from his lethargy by so imminent a peril, Charles collected an industry, firmness and vigilance of which he was believed altogether incapable. He immediately ordered Oates to be strictly confined, seized his papers, and dismissed his servants. This daring informer was obliged to make applications to Parliament, in order to recover his liberty. Eventually, as always occurs in widespread delusions, rational voices began to be heard, and over time the hatred and fear of the general populace against Catholics subsided to its normal levels. We may conclude that those at the heart of the plot, both in and out of government, retain a secret suspicion that the general belief was ill-grounded, but saw the purge as a tool for their own gain. The politicians among them were afraid to let in light, lest it might put an end to so useful a delusion. The weaker and less dishonest party took care to absolve themselves, by turning their eyes aside. The whole texture of the plot contains such low absurdity that it is impossible to have been the invention of any man of sense or education. It is true, the more monstrous and horrible the conspiracy, the better was it fitted to terrify and thence to convince the populace. But this effect, we may safely say, no one could beforehand have expected, and a fool was in this case more likely to succeed than a wise man.